Well, today turns out to be somewhat of a momentous day, as you can see. But first, because today marks the start of Pastor Liz's third year and my second year here in Santa Barbara. That's nice, isn't it? This is also a communion Sunday, and the opportunity to share and gather at the Lord's table is always special, especially because the United Methodist Church practices an open table. Whoever you are, wherever you've come from, you can join us for communion. And then we've welcomed, as you saw this morning, some folks who've been attending First Church for some time and transfers from St. Mark due to our merger. And I like to think of this as a homecoming because First Church supported the launch of St. Mark way on the far side of Santa Barbara in July of 1959. And that was back in the day when we opened churches and people just seemed to show up. Finally, today is our annual summer picnic, which serves as a kind of celebration for all of these events. And a special thank you to the Scout families who helped set this up this morning. We are also beginning a 9-week sermon series called Stained Glass Stories. For the rest of the summer, we will explore the stories depicted in the sacred windows that surround us whenever we gather in this space for worship. Now, you'll notice if you go up, I want to invite you, take close looks, but also go upstairs and look in the stairwell and look in the balcony and then look in the clear story to look at the different symbols that are represented there. I found 2 windows this morning that I didn't even know about. And I've been here all year. Preparing for this series, I wondered if some of the windows, especially the windows in the balcony, might have been part of the previous sanctuaries of our church in Santa Barbara. As you may know, this is actually the 4th sanctuary for the United Methodist Church, or the Methodist Church before that were in Santa Barbara. This is the 4th. The first sanctuary was at the corner of Bath and De La Guerra. The second sanctuary, and also the third sanctuary, were on the corner of West Figueroa and De La Vina. But on June 29th, 1995, that third sanctuary, like much of Santa Barbara, was irreparably damaged by a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. Has anybody been in an earthquake that size, 6.3 or bigger? Yeah, I've been in a 6.7. Scary, that's a lot. Because this property was then acquired on the corner, and the sanctuary was opened for worship on the first time, December 18th, 1927. And because that earthquake was so destructive, it is doubtful that any of the stained glass windows in the sanctuary were retrieved from that prior building. Though I do see a couple pieces of furniture that I still wonder about. And by the way, the first sermon preached in this sanctuary on December 18th, 1927, focused, as we are today, on the Nativity window. Except for 2, the sacred windows on this ground level, including the children's window, were made in Munich, Germany by the Franz Meyer Company, also known as the Institute of Christian Art. Our bulletin cover, you can look at the Nativity window there, but that art confirms what Wikipedia shares, that Meyer's windows typically contain richly colored scenes bordered by architectural frames and elaborate canopies. Meyer's windows also tended to imitate the great master painters of the 19th century. And on Wikipedia, I did my first ever edit of a Wikipedia page because there's listings of where you can see Franz Meyer windows, and we were not listed on Wikipedia. So now you can go to Wikipedia and see that we are listed. In our nativity window, we see 4 shepherds kneeling in adoration before the Holy Family, though Jesus does not look quite like a newborn. The scene is outdoors because Luke tells us Jesus was laid in a manger as there was no vacancy, the way we remember this story, in the inn. We see an ox and donkey and a very bright star, presumably guiding the wise men who are going to arrive at a much later date. And I am quite curious, both Pastor Liz and I picked up on this, about the fedora held by the kneeling shepherd. But I especially noticed that the shepherd with a lamb on his shoulders, perhaps in a nod to the Good Shepherd story, and as Giada said, the lantern as a nod to the light of the world. Without Luke 2, we would not have a story that included these shepherds at all. We'd also not have a manger. We'd also not have a reference to an inn, nor to swaddling bands of cloth. None of the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, or John, include these details. Only the Gospel of Luke. So if you look at the carols that we have heard and sung today, none of them would exist except for Luke 2. And neither would our beautiful nativity window, and neither would our much loved living nativity tradition. And indeed, a few things that we think we remember about the nativity story are found in none of the Gospels, not even Luke. For example, many a Christmas card depicts Mary riding to Bethlehem on a donkey. That's not in any of the Gospels. And many a Christmas pageant includes an innkeeper pointing Joseph to the stable because there's no room in the inn. But again, no innkeeper is mentioned in the Gospels whatsoever. These details, both the ones that are in the Gospel of Luke and the ones we misremember, lead us often to focus on the inhospitality that surrounded Jesus' birth in such mean estate. But for the lowly shepherds kneeling in adoration, and eventually the astrologers from the east who come bringing gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And in turn, this can lead to a problematic trope about Jewish people not providing hospitality to a vulnerable couple in a time of dire need. Some of us might even presume we would not make that same mistake if we had been approached by Joseph and Mary. Indeed, the way that we understand the story is that Mary somehow gave birth on her own without any assistance. Am I right? Isn't that how you pictured that? Because Joseph, a good Jewish husband, would not have been around to help. Kenneth Bailey, in his book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, observes the more familiar we are with the biblical story, the more difficult it is to view it outside the way it has always been understood. And the longer this imprecision remains unchallenged, the deeper it becomes embedded in Christian consciousness. The birth story of Jesus is such a story. I'm grateful that Martha Sachin gifted me with this a few months ago. It was one of Pastor Lloyd's favorite books. And Bailey corrects a couple of important misunderstandings. First, he points out that in our Western way of thinking, no room in the inn has taken on the meaning that there was an inn or several inns, like Motel 6s, with a number of rooms that were all fully occupied. Second, Bailey points out that in the Middle Eastern mind, the word manger does not evoke words like stable or barn, as it does in our Western way of thinking. And the reality is different on both counts. First, in traditional Middle Eastern villages, a simple home typically had 2 rooms. One exclusively for guests, it was called the prophet's chamber, and one where the rest of the family did everything. They ate, they cooked, they slept, maybe they played card games, I don't know. But near the entry of the house at the very end, and a few feet lower, there was a designated place inside for the family cow or donkey or sheep. A family would want their animals inside that house, inside that room, for warmth in the winter and to keep them safe from theft, because a cow or a donkey was a precious possession. A manger, or 2 troughs or basins, would be dug in the family room floor near where the animals were kept. Second, as I said, these simple homes included 1 room exclusively for guests. If Luke had meant to say that Joseph had been turned away from a commercial inn, he would have used the Greek word pandochion. But Luke uses a different word, katalama. Later in Luke 22, verses 10 through 12, katalama is translated as guest room, and it should be translated the same way in Luke 2:7. And just this morning, Rick read from the New Revised Standard Updated version, which correctly translates the word as guest room. This indicates that even though the guest room in the home where Joseph and Mary went, even though it was occupied, they were still welcomed into the part of the home where the mangers had been dug into the floor. So these realities clarify, number 1, that there was no innkeeper per se. Number 2, Jesus was born inside a private home. And number 3, that Mary likely had some assistance from at least 1 female resident of the home, if not other midwives. And we can verify this, even though these are some implications, we can verify this when we reread Luke 2:17 through 18, which says, when they, the shepherds, saw this, the baby in a manger, They made known what had been told to them about this child by the angels, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. Now, this answers a question I think some of us have had after reading all who heard it were amazed. I mean, why would Mary and Joseph be amazed? They already knew of Jesus' unique origin. So the all who heard it were amazed likely refers to everyone in the house who had no prior knowledge about this child until the shepherds shared what they had heard and seen from the angel. And by the way, this fits with the cultural expectations for how guests and even strangers would be provided hospitality in Middle Eastern villages. Now, I share none of this to dampen nor cheapen our love of the Nativity story, but I do hope to overcome that trope about the Jewish people not providing hospitality to a family in need. That is so inappropriate. A clearer understanding of Luke 2 does not support that, and knowing that can enrich our understanding, our appreciation of this story, while also inviting us to ask ourselves if we too are prepared to offer such gracious hospitality. Are we prepared to make room for the Christ child and his family in whatever season they arrive on our doorstep? Amen.